this goes back to my very first job working for the mayor of Fort Wayne. I got this job before I even graduated from college. And I had actually worked as an intern for the previous mayor. That mayor got beat in a re-election campaign. And so the people who wanted to hire me were all gone. They'd have lost their jobs. And so I called up the new mayor's office and I said, I have 3 months experience as an intern. Can I be your speech writer and public relations director? And he said, yes! And so I'm 22 years old and I'm press secretary for a mayor. And I think this is going to be a sleepy local government job, and I'll do this for a couple of years. I'm going to be out of here. Well, 5 months into this job, I came into work one morning and I ran into one of my colleagues in the parking lot. She said, did you hear what happened? And I said, no, what happened? And she said, someone tried to assassinate Vernon Jordan last night here in Fort Wayne. And Vernon Jordan, for those of you who don't know, was president of the National Urban League. And he was, in 1980, one of the most prominent civil rights leaders in our country. He was a commentator on Group W radio who I'd grown up listening to, and I was just stunned. Apparently somebody had tried to shoot him and had shot him in the back the night before. And so this began 4 days worth of incredibly intense PR. This was 1980. There was a challenge going on from Ted Kennedy trying to get the Democratic nomination away from Jimmy Carter. The Republicans were obviously trying to get the presidency away from Jimmy Carter. So we had within the first 24 hours 1,000 media calls from all over the world wondering about Mr. Jordan. And we had ABC, NBC, CBS, Time, Newsweek, AP, UPI all camped out at Parkview Hospital where our PR department was working. And the first night after the shooting, because there was lots of potential racial tension about this shooting in our community, our police public information officer, who also had been in the job for all of about 5 months, decided that he would try to poo-poo the racial tension. And he would say that, well, Mr. Jordan went out after his speech to the local urban league with a white woman board member. And she brought him back to his hotel, the Fort Wayne Marriott, and that's when he was shot. And we don't think this was any kind of racial thing. We think this was a, quote, domestic type incident. Now that wasn't true. And he had no reason to believe that was true, and it was an insult to Mr. Jordan, and it was an insult to Mrs. Jordan, and it was an insult to Mrs. Jordan's parents, and it was an insult to Mrs. Coleman, who he had been out with, and Mr. Coleman. And right after that, he wasn't the spokesperson on this issue anymore. It was 22-year-old me and my 30-year-old colleague. And 4 days later, when Jimmy Carter came into town, and he came suddenly from Plains, Georgia, and the Secret Service forgot their national media lists. They said, well, you guys have been working with these media for 4 years, for four days. You decide who gets into the president's news conference. And so I did. That event taught me that you don't make lemons out of lemonade ever by speculating. You never, ever, and Steve knows this from his job, you never speculate in a crisis, and that police PR will do it. Okay, fast forward 2 years. We have a very, very bad flood in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Fort Wayne has 3 rivers, the Maumee, the St. Joe, and the rivers are rising and rising and rising way over flood stage. And this lasts for days and days, and the rivers keep rising. And we have volunteers out who are throwing sandbags on the dikes that are lined all along those rivers. It's not working. The mayor says one night early in the flood that the dikes have gotten to the consistency of toothpaste. And he came in one morning and said, we don't have enough volunteers, we've got to do something, what can we do? Well, I knew a high school principal who had been an assistant principal at my high school and was now principal at Fort Wayne Northside right next to the river. I picked up the phone and I called him about 7:15 one morning and I said, Dan, will you close your school because we need your kids? And he said, well, I can't just close one school, I'm going to have to call the superintendent. And he calls the superintendent, he says, mayor's office has called us, we need to do something. They closed all the schools. And those kids came out and they started putting sandbags on the dikes. 15,000 people came out and threw sandbags on the dikes. They protected $600 million worth of property. And all of a sudden we had not a disaster story on our hands for ABC, NBC, CBS, AP, UPI, all these people who were in our city covering this. They were anchoring ABC World News Tonight from Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's never happened before or since. But we had a heroism story. And the heroism story was cool. And so all of a sudden we got a call from a guy at the White House named Michael Deaver, who was the PR guy for a guy named Ronald Reagan, who was president, who had in fact beaten Jimmy Carter for the presidency. And they said, we want to fly the president in and have him throw a few sandbags on dikes with the teenagers. Sure. So on the Tuesday of this flood, Reagan flies in the afternoon, and I'm out at Fort Wayne Bearfield to meet the president's plane, Air Force One. And just to make things interesting in Fort Wayne, I'm standing there and Air Force One is landing over here, and I'm looking out here toward Decatur, Indiana, and looking at a funnel cloud. This is great. So the president's plane lands, all the national media are with him, the presidential press corps, and I find myself at age 24 on a bus standing backward, briefing the White House press corps as we're driving to the corner of Herman and Sherman Street, which is where the president's going to throw sandbags on the dikes with the kids, and he in fact does. So this becomes an amazing media story of heroism, of people trying to save their city. And we have at the time a 12.8% unemployment rate. We think it's bad now. It was 3 points higher then. And I have, as part of my responsibility, marketing the city for economic development. So the weekend after the flood, I go to my cousin's wedding with my parents. I'm driving back home. I think we ought to try to turn lemons into lemonade. And we ought to do that by saying, you know, these people worked this hard on this flood. Imagine how hard they worked for your company. And I wrote an ad at the back of the car. I wrote it on a legal pad at the back of the car called The City That Saved Itself. And the ad features photographs by the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette, Fort Wayne News Sentinel. I got it laid out by a local ad agency. And it said that these 50,000 people had saved $600 million worth of property. They had kept business in business for the entire time. And if they can do that, imagine how hard they can work in your company. And we went door to door, business to business to business to business. We raised $50,000. And we put that ad in Fortune and Forbes and the Wall Street Journal and all these national media. We advertised a disaster. We Now here's what's cool about this. This is just a stupid thing to do, which makes it newsworthy. So I pick up the phone and I call ABC and NBC and CBS and Forbes and Fortune and the Wall Street Journal and all these people, and I said, these people are trying to make lemons out of lemonade. They're frigging nuts. You ought to come cover the story. And so we end up with Paul Harvey and Time and Newsweek and CBS and the Wall Street Journal running stories about our ad campaign about the flood. And then, of course, we do another ad that's